I'm so excited to have Dr. Joel Kahn on my show today. Dr. Kahn of Detroit, Michigan is a practicing cardiologist and clinical professor of medicine at the Wayne State University School of Medicine. He is known as America's Healthy Heart Doc, and Dr. Kahn has double board certifications in internal medicine and cardiovascular medicine, and was the first physician in the world to certify in metabolic cardiology. And he's the author of many books. The one book that I've been reading here, The Plant-Based Solutions, which is phenomenal. And I recommend anybody who's listening or watching to this show to purchase a copy. And I'll leave a link to the book in the description below as well. So Dr. Kahn, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy man, so thank you.
Let's kick heart disease in the butt. Happy to do it.
Let's do it. All righty. I'm really curious after looking through your book and researching the work that you're doing. It's interesting that, in the 1940s, it really wasn't common to have a heart attack. But now people are dying from or having heart attacks about every 39 seconds or so. So what has changed over the 70 plus years?
And probably slightly is there has been heart disease. You can take a CT scan of mummies and find that their arteries are aged. You can find a very interesting piece of anthropology named Otzi the Iceman, who fell in a crevice. I think it was in Germany 5,000 years ago, perfectly preserved. There's a lot written about him. Although I think it was 20 years ago, there still are new research studies coming about applying DNA analysis. He had coronary artery disease 5,000 years ago. But you're absolutely right. According to textbooks, according to many observations, after World War II, the economy got robust. Simultaneous, the food industry got interesting, and soon we had McDonald's, and soon we had processed box foods. Grocery stores were little, all of a sudden they were big. Icebox were little, all of a sudden they were big, and many other changes like that. And, a lot of people came back from World War II smoking. I got to give a shout out to a very bad habit. Society started expanding. Stress always existed, but it perhaps became a little bit more easy to be isolated. Actually, it leads me to a kind of rabbit trail for a second I'll tell you about. There's a very interesting town in Pennsylvania, Roseto. Thank you, brain, for remembering that. Roseto. In about 1880, 1890, 1,100 citizens of a town in Italy, Roseto, in block moved and migrated to reproduce their society in Pennsylvania. And it was remarked in the 40s and even in the 50s that the city next to Roseto would have a heart attack rate 5 times, 6 times, 7 times higher. Why? They were smokers. They ate their mortadella sausage sometimes. But they were very tight-knit, and they were very socially connected, and they went to weddings, they went to funerals. Grandparents lived with grandkids, and the whole thing. This has been studied and published. It's not just anecdote. But in the 60s, kids started going off to college, and McDonald's was in the next town, and the grocery store started having food that grandma never made in Roseto, Italy, or Roseto, Pennsylvania. And heart disease rates quickly rose to standard American rates. And it's been used as an example of food changes, stress changes, disconnection of family, social connection changes. It's all the above. Now, in 2018, 2019, 2020, we unfortunately have to talk about air pollution as a major trigger of heart attack. We can talk about perhaps they're called xenoestrogens or endocrine disruptors, plastic bottles, thermal receipts, personal use items, fragrance sprays that you smell all the time to keep the air fresh that actually affect your endocrine system. So it's got very complex. Our genetics haven't changed in 50 years much, but our environment has changed ridiculously fast. And we're suffering because 2,000 people a day in the United States die of cardiovascular disease. The most conservative estimate is that 1,000 of those a day could be prevented fairly easily with lifestyle, early testing. Some people estimate as many as 1,700 a day could be prevented, 80%. So that's what gets me fired up is people are dying that don't need to die, bottom line. Not a new concept, but it's still not central to cardiology to say it, to teach it. I'll tell you one last anecdote. At the bedside of President Dwight Eisenhower, 1955, massive heart attack while serving as President of the United States. Imagine social media nowadays if that were to happen. The Harvard cardiologist, Dr. Paul Dudley White, taking care of him, turned to Eisenhower and basically made the statement, Eisenhower, who had been a 4-pack-a-day smoker during the war, he had quit by that. A heart attack after age 80 was an act of God. A heart attack before age 80 was a failure of medical education. Not teaching people diet, fitness, sleep, stress, environment, smoking, and proper testing, lab and other, could identify virtually everybody at risk for heart disease. We still don't do it except a few oddball clinics like mine here in suburban Detroit.
Yeah, interesting. So people are eating themselves to death. And because of...
there's actually this classic quote from Greek about exactly that. Don't dig your grave with your own fork and spoon was, I think, one way to phrase it.
Yeah, the sad part is so many people are. Oh, it's good. I don't want to stop eating it. So question, Dr. Kahn. There's so much confusion now on fats, saturated fat, and I know plant foods, you find saturated fats, but I know a lot of health experts are saying, well, the information out there, the science out there is old science. It's not up to speed with the science we have today. So fill us in. What's going on with the saturated fat?
So first of all, we can say pretty categorically, plant foods have no dietary cholesterol. And although there's great confusion and misrepresentation, for example, that the 2015 USDA dietary guidelines removed dietary cholesterol as a nutrient of concern. It's actually not true. When you read it, they say eat as little dietary cholesterol as possible. They just didn't put a number. There used to be a number 300 milligrams a day, about the size of one medium-sized egg, or 200. They just said eat as little as possible. They still said it was of concern and we should eliminate cholesterol from our diet, which is plant-based. Saturated fat exists in a few situations. Tropical oils are the worst. Now, they're not whole foods. Coconut oil is not a coconut, and palm oil is not a palm free, but they can be 80-85% saturated fat. That's very unusual. Whole avocados have some, avocado oil a little bit more. Whole olives have some. Olive oil has a little more, about 15% saturated fat. But in general, any diet stacked up with whole food, plant constituents that make up the plate entirely or nearly entirely will be much lower for sure in cholesterol and lower in saturated fat. And there's no doubt about that. So what's the big deal? You're right. When this rise in heart attack in the 1940s started to be experienced, certain brilliant visionary scientists said, we got to figure this out. Is this random or can it be explained by factors we can measure? And that's when the concept of risk factors, and that goes back to that same cardiologist that took care of Eisenhower, Paul Dudley White, probably the first cardiologist to talk about that, and a very famous scientist, Ansel Keys. And they studied the diet of people all over the world and found an association. Diets high in animal saturated fat were associated with a much higher risk of coronary heart disease, about 10-fold difference. Okinawa, Japan, they eat their vegetables, they eat their purple potatoes, they eat their little tiny fish a little bit, they eat their rice. Not much rice actually in Okinawa, more purple potatoes. Low saturated fat diet, very low heart disease diet. Go to Finland, they love their butter, their cheese, their meats, their sausages. Very high saturated fat intake in their diet from animal products, 10 times the rate of heart attack. So those were the studies. Now, over the years, there's no doubt that there's a very strong association. We know when you eat a diet high in animal saturated fat, it impacts how many cholesterol receptors are on your liver. High-fat diets reduce the number of receptors, so your blood cholesterol goes up. That's a bad thing. What has confused the world is, and this has been reported in the media, I think accurately, in 2008, the dairy industry met in Mexico City and said, we're losing the battle. This little milk mustache campaign is being replaced by people drinking that awful soy milk, that terrible almond milk, now subsequently, 10 other kinds from pea protein milk and hemp milk and all the rest, oat milk. We need to find sympathetic athletes and professors and scientists. And within a couple of years, actually, the milk mustache campaign came out then. But a paper was published by several researchers in 2010, soon after that meeting. And the notes of that meeting are public, so it's not like I made up a conspiracy theory. A paper was published reevaluating, was this association between diets high in saturated fat and early heart disease valid? the papers said we couldn't confirm it. They never said eat more saturated fat, start putting butter in your coffee. They questioned it. Siri Torino was the first author. Dr. Ronald Krauss was the senior author. The paper was so flawed. It wasn't new science. It's called a meta-analysis. That in the same edition of the journal, American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, a very well-known and esteemed epidemiologist scientist named Jeremiah Stamler was allowed to write an article saying how bad the first article was. That's so rare in medical journals. You publish an article that's controversial, and you have a very esteemed scientist say, it's awful, here's all the mistakes. Well, that's what happened. Yet, they say once you rip open a feather pillow and let them out, you're never going to get all the feathers back. Anybody who wanted to use Siri Torino paper in 2010 as ammunition, butter's good. And then a second paper of similar design by an author named Chowdhury came out in 2014. A paper so bad, Harvard School of Public Health said retract it. It's awful. Its design, its setup is flawed. It wasn't new science. It's called this meta-analysis. They didn't go out and measure people's meals. They didn't go out and do food questionnaires. So those two things led Time Magazine, Butter is Back, gave Dr. Mark Hyman license to write a book called Eat Fat, Get Thin, and on and on. And it just hasn't stopped because, in part, who advertises in magazines, TV, radio? I mean, grocery stores, dairy, meat, they got the big budget. People say, I read on the internet about these vegan billionaires that are influencing the food industry, and I have to laugh. I mean, I don't know who they are, and maybe there's a few, but Tyson Chicken is investing in meat substitute companies, and Smithfield Pork is investing in meat substitute companies. These aren't billionaire vegans. These are billionaires that see the future is shifting meat to either factory-produced food or genetically produced food that's meat without the animal, or even better yet, peas and beans and lentils and the rest. But it totally did what they needed to do, according to the dairy industry 2008, confuse the public. I'm at a restaurant. My doctor doesn't know what the heck diet to recommend to me. I'm just going to have the cheesy burger with the cheesy fries and throw a milkshake in. Now, I just recently, the U.S. News and World Report for about the 10th year in a row, published the best diets in America. You can argue that the 20 panelists aren't without bias, although, one's a well-known Harvard professor, Joanne, and one's a Yale professor, David Katz. One's an esteemed cardiologist, Emory. I mean, they're pretty solid people. What they call the best diet for heart disease in America, Dr. Dean Ornish plant diet, and as an alternative, the Mediterranean diet. What did they list as the worst diets in America out of 41? Paleo, keto, and Whole30. And these are, this is not the first year that was the way the list was ordered. So pay attention. Keto dangerous. Keto danger. Keto, not a long-term diet.
Now, what is it with the keto? I mean, everyone is doing keto. Fat, fat, fat. So how is that affecting any individual's cardiovascular system long-term?
It's going to help depopulate the overloaded world population. So, I mean, there's a silent conspiracy there. Sadly, what I just said is true, and I'll back it up for a minute. It is January in Detroit, and I have a hornet flying around my office, but that's okay. I think the meat and dairy industry sent that in as a spy. I just never seen that. I'm not distracted. It's a big sucker. And if you see me go undercover, it's because I'm being attacked. It could be a drone sent by the dairy industry. 100. Actually, there's some quote again by Hippocrates thousands of years ago about potential role of high-fat diets treating disease. But about 100 years ago, it was identified if you're a child with epilepsy and you went on, they tried to water fast those children. It's pretty hard to get a child to participate long-term. And they tried high-fat diets and seizure frequency went down. And it is in the medical literature for decades that if you have refractory epilepsy as a child and you have no recourse and you get put on a high-fat diet, extremely high-fat, 90% calories, you might, about a third, will respond with less seizure. But the side effects are very well described in those authentic medical articles. Cardiac issues, a few cases of sudden death, skin issues, breath issues, stomach issues, and on. Somehow that little piece of literature translated when LeBron James stopped eating carbs and Halle Berry stopped eating carbs. And let's distinguish, because I just used a very sloppy term. I mean, Carbs are a macronutrient. They're not a food group. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, meat, dairy, eggs are food groups.
Yeah.
Almost all foods are a combination of fat, protein, and carbohydrate macronutrients. But by eliminating all the evil pasta, all the evil beans, all the evil whole grains, getting those foods very low and substituting a lot of fat, somehow that got into the popular culture. Dr. Atkins obviously kicked the game off 35, 40 years ago. You could lose weight quick. No doubt about it. Even the U.S. News and World Report said the second best diet for quick weight loss was the ketogenic diet. Is quick weight loss mortgaging your health for the long term if you stay on that diet? So it's just gained popular acclaim. What I'm offended by is there are 10 studies in the medical literature, large studies. These are association studies because nutrition science is evil to try and do. People that report that their diet is low carb, high fat, long term have a higher death rate than people that describe their diet otherwise, medium or high, hopefully complex carbohydrates like fruits, vegetables, whole grains. Higher death rate. That's why I call it the low carb, high coffin diet. Because when you throw all these studies together, there's more than 1 million people. There are, studies from the Physicians' Health Study, the Nurses' Health Study, Harvard School of Public Health. If you are a cardiologist and you see a patient who's had a heart attack, and they say, hey, I turned on the TV and they're talking about these keto diets, so I'm doing it. You are seeing a patient who's creating a path to higher death rate after heart attack, according to a fairly large study from Harvard. So I'm very concerned because there isn't really any counter argument. All these people, all these keto podcasts and keto books and keto medical doctors.
You see them popping up right and left.
Yeah, the low-carb cardiologist and the low-carb endocrinologist. Why don't you at least say, if you're going to do this, be aware, because that's our mission as physicians. I don't have any axe to grind with a ketogenic diet. What do I care? It may be horrible for the environment and horrible for animals if you jack it up with meats like this crazy carnivore diet trend. But if it really helps people and if it helps children with epilepsy, go for it. But let's talk about responsible medical reporting, which I don't see very much of, and it is a concern, so I shout out all the time.
Yeah.
If you want to do keto for a week or 10 days to get into a tuxedo for a wedding, go for it. If you want to do it long-term, read the scientific data. I have a article on the internet called Low Carb, High Coffin Diet. It has all the literature there and hyperlinks. And finally, there is a little movement about something called vegan keto, trying to do this all with plant-based oils, plant-based whole foods, nuts, avocados. I've done it for a week just to be part of the frenzy, lost a few pounds. I didn't like the flavor and the greasiness of everything. Can be done. So there just isn't a lot of science. There's one example by Dr. Walter Longo, one of the world experts on longevity, of the fasting mimicking diet, which is 5 days of a plant-based ketogenic program. But after 5 days, you go back and eat a healthy Mediterranean or healthy whole food plant diet. So 5 days is enough, according to the world's expert on nutrition.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned the plant form of the keto, and I think of the work of Dr. Esselstyn and how he's a real proponent of a low-fat diet. So are there risks with the vegan keto long-term as well?
Well, so, I have all the world of respect and affection for a good friend, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, and others like Dr. Dean Ornish that did pioneering clinical work that I follow and teach patients. But you can go back, and these are key studies in the 60s, 70s. When I mentioned Okinawa, Japan had a extremely low heart attack rate, and their percentage of calories from fat sources was generally judged to be under 10%, which is like an Esselstyn diet, like a Dr. Ornish diet. Crete, the island of Crete, had an equally low heart attack rate during that same period of the 50s and the 60s. And 40% of the calories in the Cretan diet was actually from fats. It was from extra virgin olive oil, from Uncle Giovanni's, or Uncle Thaddeus's olive tree right there. It was about as fresh and as clean as olive oil gets. So there are a range of diets that focus on clean, fresh, whole plants, or possibly even processed plants, meaning olive oil, that all support, according to literature, health and well-being. Now, that's a little different. That's the general public. That's population studies saying people come to my office saying, I have bypass surgery next week. I want to work to avoid bypass. Well, I'm not suggesting that they do a vegan keto diet. They're going to learn about Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Ornish, the Pritikin Longevity Center, which is also a very low, naturally low fat. No, it's not that. So I don't teach we hate all fats all the time. Your listeners want to eat an avocado, half an avocado, some whole olives, some nuts, some tempeh. Go for it. If you're facing bypass surgery, you better get in tune with a serious but important slice of the medical literature.
Yeah, absolutely. When I think of heart disease, I know the story that you mentioned as far as genetics in Bob Harper. Now, what about the individual who has heart disease and it's because of a genetic predisposition?
Yeah, so I run a very interesting clinic. Anybody listening wants to fly to Detroit will have a great old time. There's very few places like this. But my patients get very advanced lab work through their insurance system. Mm-hmm. Many of those are genetic tests that influence your risk of heart disease. Of course, you carry that from the day you're born or even the day you're conceived. By the time I see people age 40, 50, 60, they've had that risk for all those decades. And they matter, but I see many people with silent atherosclerosis, and some have genetically low risk, and it appears to be mainly lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And others have very clean lifestyles, yet they have some evidence in their carotid arteries of their heart of silent but important atherosclerosis. And I have to actually point out to them that their parents gave them somewhat what we call the loaded gun, and environment pulls the trigger, but the loaded gun is not necessarily benign. Bob Harper announced on the Dr. Oz show about 2 months after suffering a near-death experience on the treadmill in a health club, and the only reason he survived that heart attack was the cardiologist on the treadmill next to him was a heart specialist that had a defibrillator right there to bring him back to life. Mm-hmm. He announced, whoa, I've learned I have a genetic kind of cholesterol called LP little a or lipoprotein little a, which anybody can get checked for about $25 in any lab, and I encourage everybody to make sure your lipoprotein little a is absent in your blood and your parents gave you a genetic advantage. Mm-hmm. If it's sky high, come see somebody like me that spends most of my practice dealing with abnormalities of lipoprotein A. But yeah, it is a real deal. If you find out you got some genetic baggage, so you eat better, you exercise better, you stress free better, you sleep better, you meditate better, because you do have a little bit of baggage to deal with.
So lifestyle is still beneficial, even if you have a genetic issue.
Yeah, it's triple beneficial.
Really? Fabulous.
You can't screw around if you have a predisposition that can be defined. Yeah. So, for example, you can do a blood test. We talk about high fat, low fat. You can do a blood test, pretty available. Some people think it's controversial. It's called ApoE. Your parents may have given you 2 genes called ApoE33. Lower risk of cardiovascular disease, lower risk of Alzheimer's, reasonably able to tolerate a medium fat diet. But I have patients that got from their parents something you wouldn't really want, ApoE44, 2 different genes. Makes you many times higher risk for Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, and you do not tolerate saturated fat in the diet well. Your cholesterol goes up much higher. And there is some reason to tell people you have a genetic reason to eat like Dr. Dean Ornish. You have a genetic reason to eat like Dr. Neil Bernard, naturally low-fat diets, because they're whole food, plant diets, and by definition, they will be naturally low in fat. So I use that to guide people, and sometimes we have the Alzheimer's discussion, and we talk about keep your body thin, get good sleep, manage stress, turmeric, blueberries, cinnamon, ginger, all the natural things that are kind of anti-inflammatory and pro-brain.
Yeah. So if anybody is watching or listening to this, they need to connect with you, especially if they have any type of heart disease.
Well, I'd be happy to, answer a question or two. I get so many darn questions on Facebook and Instagram. Yeah. I try not to be an Instagram doctor, but I do. It's called Kahn Center for Cardiac Longevity in suburban Detroit, KahnLongevityCenter.com. And I see people from India and Amsterdam and Israel, Paris, and there just aren't too many of us. I've spent years doing traditional cardiology, cath lab stents, heart attacks, hospital work. I've been plant-based for 40 years, and I've been back to university to study the weird stuff like infrared sauna and meditation. There actually are university programs that teach lifestyle.
Yeah.
So I kind of do most of all that pretty much every day myself in my own life. But, I'd like to empower people to teach them, like you say, lifestyle. How critically important is you're in charge of your diet. I mean, don't make excuses. Nobody puts food in your mouth against your will.
That's true.
You're in charge of your sleep. You're in charge of your fitness schedule, whether it's 15 minutes a day or an hour a day. I mean, everybody's got 24 hours. I beat them up a little bit. Like if anybody knows who David Goggins, Navy SEAL, is, I give them full Goggins. You're in charge, but you're also responsible. You're the CEO of your health. I can describe what you need to do, but I don't take a lot of excuses because 2,000 people a day die of cardiovascular disease, and maybe 1,600 they don't need to.
Yeah. Two other things I want to touch on. You talk about TMAO and the concerns with that. And also, I want to look at, or you could share a little bit as far as supplements, maybe not just for those individuals who have heart issues, but generally those who are on a plant-based diet. I know there's individuals that say, well, B12 is a concern or DHA is a concern. Do I need to take a multivitamin? So if you want to touch on those two.
Okay, so TMAO is a molecule in the blood that wasn't much discussed or appreciated until about 7 years ago when some researchers at the Cleveland Clinic basically said there's got to be more in the blood that's harming arteries than just lipoprotein little a and blood sugar and blood pressure and cholesterol fractions. And they had reason to have a short list, and they quickly identified the higher. They developed a way to measure this new molecule in the blood. It had never been measured before, and still there's only one lab that does it. They're now owned by Quest, so any Quest lab can measure your TMAO level, and I've done more of those levels than any other doctor in the United States. It's just been something I knew about very early on. So they quickly identified that the higher the blood level of TMAO, the higher was the burden of plaque in your heart arteries. They quickly identified that TMAO causes platelets to clump together. That's called a blood clot. That's not a great thing to have unexpected. They identified that it causes arteries to develop atherosclerosis. That's at least pretty strong theory, not just a marker, but actually cause atherosclerosis. Then what really rocked the world in 2013 is they found out if you eat a piece of red meat or you eat an egg, you will raise your TMAO. If you're an omnivore, average person, carnitine, an amino acid in meat, red meat, and carne, chili con carne, carnitine, it's the amino acid very profoundly high in red meat, and choline, a precursor to many brain and healthy substances, but in excess will raise TMAO. They took their red meat away, took their egg yolk away, TMAO went down. Then they classically did these studies where they found some vegans in Cleveland for $100 were willing to eat an 8-ounce steak, and they would not make this molecule because you have to eat those foods, then your gut bacteria have to be of a certain kind to produce this TMAO. And the gut bacteria in a long-time vegan is different than the gut bacteria in an omnivore. If you eat a steak every day, you're not a vegan anymore, and you'll start making this stuff. And it's to the point now there is not a probiotic or vitamin that we know that blocks TMAO. I've had hundreds of people, they stopped eating red meat, stopped eating egg yolk, their TMAO level came down. You also you need to read your supplements. Many kind of gym sports supplements have carnitine in them for weight building. Some have choline in them. I just had a patient today with a high TMAO level. 2 of his supplements from his chiropractor have choline in them. I think that's the reason. I told him you got to go back and discuss that. Also has ground up beef hearts and beef glands. So I'd like him to get off that darn supplement. Anyways, makes me ill. So that's the TMAO story. Cleveland Clinic is chasing down a blocker that can be patented, that can become a prescription drug, that might show some benefit in heart disease, congestive heart failure, diabetes, kidney disease. But it's a real deal. Now, the only confusing issue, and I've written about this recently, fish produce TMAO in their flesh. So if you eat fish, and only a few fish, not all fish, just like not all fish have a lot of omega-3. Salmon, sardine, and herring have a lot of omega-3, but many fish don't. Not all fish have a lot of TMAO, only a few. But you can raise your blood level and your urine level of TMAO by eating fish. So the the pro-meat, pro-egg group say, whoa, this all falls apart because fish are perfect for the heart. And if fish have TMAO, there can't possibly be.
Yeah.
That needs more research. I am aware of a paper that will be coming out in the next 6 months from the Cleveland Clinic. I can't predict what it's going to say, but they're searching and working on it. There is some data that questions exactly how heart healthy fish is. If you give a animal model fish, you can actually produce atherosclerosis. So that's just a few papers, but it doesn't make it so crystal clear that fish is a panacea, particularly in 2019, where there's a lot of mercury in fish and a lot of DDT and a lot of PCB. Yeah. Anyway, so that's a TMAO story. Again, if anybody wants to read more, I wrote an interesting blog about TMAO and fish. You just can Google it and you'll find it on medium.com. Supplements, I am schooled in supplements. I believe you're a better plant eater and a better vegan if you're really 100% on the program like I've been. You know, you can take your chances and skip B12 and skip vitamin D and skip omega-3. You can get blood tests because you can easily measure B12, vitamin D, omega-3, or you can just take them. So I've shown you can take 2 pills a day. Actually, right now there's a company from Australia, I don't remember the name, 1 capsule a day as a pill, has all the D, omega-3, and B12 anybody would need. It's as simple as can be for about 90 cents a day.
It's not bad.
Why risk it? Not bad. There's a spray that's available that has algae, omega-3, D, and B12, maybe about $1.50 a day. Not bad. Covers the bases. I'll give a shout out. I love Dr. Joel Furman. He's speaking in Detroit tomorrow night. He's from New Jersey.
Oh, great.
He's got a kind of a multivitamin for men and women that kind of cover all the bases.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Furman. He spoke at our event last June.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you have to do that? Is it a giant flaw in the plant diet when you get, a zillion more nutrients, way more vitamin C, way more, actually you get more iron, although it's called the non-heme iron, you get way more fiber, you get way more magnesium. You might get selenium from your Brazil nuts and all that stuff, that you may have to be reasonable, be medical about it, and say it's a perfect diet with 2 pills a day. So, and then the environment's better and the animals are better and we lower the risk of obesity and diabetes and hyperlipidemia and hypertension and all the rest. Some people argue on the internet and, the place where all good fights are nowadays on Twitter, it can't be a good diet if you have to supplement it. Well, give me somebody eating a lot of meat and I'll show you what they're lacking in their diet because you can run tests. It's easy to run tests and it's also, easy to calculate. There's something very cool called vegancalculator.com. How long have you been eating plants? How many forests and gallons of water and amount of greenhouse gases and how many animals did you not contribute to the world kind of disordered state right now by eating plant-based. So there's that bug again. See, I mentioned meat and the flying dragon. The flying dragon came back.
Yeah. Okay, so even on a plant-based diet, it's recommended to consume some supplements.
Yeah, and then those 3 I'm very comfortable recommending. Vitamin D, a couple thousand international units a day. Vitamin B12, 250 micrograms, 500 micrograms a day. And omega-3, chia, flax, hemp, walnuts. But there are many, many algae-based little capsules or sprays that are all the omega-3 you might need. Omega-3, I think, it's critical. My meat eaters have very low omega-3 levels.
Really?
We don't make omega-3. We need omega-3 for cholesterol, blood sugar, blood pressure, brain health. It's challenging. Now, if you're eating salmon 4 times a week, you might have a very good blood level. You might have a very high mercury level. So there's a very interesting video, I think you mentioned, Dr. Michael Greger, who has his own list of supplements for a plant eater to take, and I agree with it. It's a little longer than those 3 actually, but he has a very interesting video about blood levels of omega-3 and future brain health. Well, I don't want to risk it. I really don't want to risk it. I'll take a little omega-3 capsule, and I eat a lot of flax and a lot of chia and a lot of walnuts.
Yeah. Now, as far as the multiples, are you concerned? I know some individuals will say, well, with your plant-based diet, you don't want to get too much of this or that with your multiple.
Not really. The thing, there are water-soluble vitamins and fat-soluble vitamins. Vitamin D, vitamin E. I must be tired. I'm blanking on the other common fat-soluble vitamin. You do not want to overdose.
Yeah.
They can build up in the body. It's generally felt you can take a whole lot of vitamin B12. It'll just make your urine nice, bright yellow.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly riboflavin, one of the Bs, will make your urine bright yellow. They're water soluble. You'll eliminate what you don't need. And folic acid, maybe not a good one to take in excess. In fact, I prefer vitamins that have other forms called folate. But if you're eating a lot of leafy greens, you don't really need to supplement folate. So
fabulous.
Yeah. Yes, there's, for example, selenium.
Mm-hmm.
You eat Brazil nuts. They're rich in selenium. You take a multivitamin, there might be selenium. You can drive selenium to excess, but that's not one that's mentioned very much or focused on very much, actually.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody recently, and they said their blood work showed that they were toxic and they had high levels of copper in their body.
Yeah, well, there's a genetic disorder called Wilson's disease described at the University of Michigan where I trained, which is a hereditary copper excess. There's copper in pipes, and there are environmental reasons, just like lead pipes breaking down. Yeah. There can be a little bit of copper in some multivites, not most, but theoretically, I guess you can be exposed to too much.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, Dr. Kahn, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else you would like to share before I let you go?
Probably just one thing. I'm going to reach over for a minute. This is not a shameless plug. This is because I really don't. I wrote a book in addition to the plant-based solution about 4 years ago with this crazy title, Dead Execs Don't Get Bonuses. Mm-hmm. This is a brand new edition, short little read, inexpensive book. But it goes through, in addition, since we're talking about heart disease, how for about 20 years, but particularly now, there is a CAT scan that anybody age 45 and up, 40 and up, can spend $100 or $50 in your local community. I'll give you the name of the scan in a minute. And you can create quick little pictures, no iodine, no needles, no pain, no allergic reaction. Tell you if your heart arteries really are clean or you're one of these very frequent examples of silent atherosclerosis. Maybe 50% of people walking around with unknown heart disease, even though they saw their doctor, they had a physical, had their blood pressure checked, maybe even had a stress test. That's called a heart artery calcium CT scan. Heart artery calcium CT scan. Used to be $1,000, used to be kind of an exclusive club for somebody to get. Now every medium and large hospital in America sometimes required a physician's prescription pad, sometimes not, offers a test. So if you have a relative that had a heart attack at a young age or a bypass, if you know your cholesterol or you used to smoke or you got other reasons from suspicion, about age 40, 45, if you're out playing hockey, you're in a high-risk group, you're a police officer, get the darn test, heart artery calcium CT scan. Maybe get it once in your life, maybe get it once 10 years later. But we can pick up people at risk.
Is that right?
Bob Harper would have known 1 week, 1 month, 1 year before he got on that treadmill that he was walking around with silent heart disease. No question about it.
And that is preventative right there.
Well, in that, if nothing else, it might get somebody in tune with better lifestyle. And if they started to feel things that they blew off and said, there's my heartburn, they might remember, 6 months ago, they told me I have the arteries of a 90-year-old. Maybe I shouldn't blow this off. So I've seen people be much more in tune with a change in their health and get medical attention quicker.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Kahn, thank you so much for coming on. You're a busy man. I appreciate
you
taking this time out of your day. For the viewers, listeners, I recommend you pick up one of Dr. Kahn's books, either this one or one of the others. I'll leave a link to the books in the description below. So thank you so much again, Dr. Kahn. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing the good message, because we're going to help some people today.
Absolutely. All right. Have a beautiful day.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.